This is gonna be weirder than usual. Can't be helped.
I've been working toward Control for a while. It's the reason I started Alan Wake recently, and it's been a game on my to-do list for a long time. So it was exciting to finally get to it, even if Alan Wake 2 has now become my ultimate goal in this sequence of Remedy games. Over the years, I've heard bits and pieces about Control, but thinking back, even a few weeks ago as I started playing, I didn't really have a clear idea of what the game was. This comes to mind now only because some parts of the game surprised me, while other parts were very much a natural evolution of what Remedy has done before in their games I've played. I think Quantum Break, which I've skipped over for now, might be a missing link in that evolution for me, because even knowing this game was well regarded, I was immediately surprised by just how much smoother and more refined the action gameplay was in Control. On top of that, all the specific flavor, the art and story, that I've avoided all these years was right up my alley, alongside Remedy's hallmark live-action sequences that remain a little melodramatic, but fun nonetheless. I've been playing the Ultimate Edition of the game on PC, but have only finished the base game so far. I'm absolutely going to be playing both Foundation and AWE, the two expansions, but wanted to create a little separation between them and the main game for myself. I stuck primarily to the main story until it was over, since it wasn't immediately clear to me which side quests or parts of the game, especially in the second half, were going to veer into the expansions. Once these paths were clear, I did all the side quests I found, and finished exploring the areas and other things I had captured notes on. I've been able to play on essentially max settings, including ray tracing. This is the first game I've ever been able to do that with, and I think Control is one of the first games I remember whose application of ray tracing was considered good. I certainly thought the game looked fantastic all around. Reflections and lighting were standout elements. Dynamic destructibility of the environment, the intricate animations of your weapon and abilities, and their interactions with objects around you were also highlights. The world of the old house undulates and changes, playing with perspective and lighting. There are visual elements very reminiscent of other games and media I've seen, like the floating bodies of those taken over by the hiss, and the way the old house reconfigures itself around you. The style is very much my kind of thing, though, and I thought it was well executed. The very first section of the game does something specific, changing the structure of the initial hallways you traverse in a subtle but pretty noticeable way, initiating you into this world and giving you the clear sense that not everything is as it seems. This is a very cool moment because you notice it yourself, but also unique since the rest of the game keeps environmental changes mostly visual. They're interesting to see and traverse, but not really gameplay impacting like this first part hints they might be. My first thought when I took control of Jesse beyond the intro section was just how good the movement and shooting felt. Control heads even further down the path of action gameplay that I've come to think of as the core of Alan Wake, but it modernizes and expands it. This becomes clearer and clearer as you start to acquire the paranatural abilities that augment gunplay. You'd be forgiven for thinking this was another third-person cover shooter if you only saw a screenshot or watched a moment of gameplay. You can take cover, and cover can be useful, but any structural elements have a penchant for getting shredded by enemies. There's no built-in bind to cover, or to pop out, shoot, and hide. You can crouch and do these things manually, but it's most fun and effective to keep moving, land your abilities without obstacles in the way, and protect yourself out in the open using other options at your disposal. And I have to assume the game is designed to encourage this. I found myself using abilities as much as possible, since it's always fun to do more than just shoot. Abilities are highly effective in many cases, and a more unique aspect of the game. Abilities are governed by the energy it costs to use them. But like Alan Wake's flashlight battery in American Nightmare, this recharges quickly, even without really investing into upgrades. I generally always had enough at my disposal. Its limitation does encourage you to vary your offensive actions, though. The service weapon, your gun, which can take on a number of different unlockable forms, has a similar and familiar constraint: ammunition. However, it also has a very simple but striking difference from most shooter games, in that you never have to pick up or worry about that ammunition, or reloading for that matter. Ammo simply recharges over time when not in use, just like your ability energy, leading to a natural pattern of swapping between the two to keep up a constant stream of attack. It's also advantageous not to deplete either fully, since doing so leads to longer recharge time. It's wonderfully freeing, and quite the polar opposite of something like an active reload mechanic that can distract you from the situation you're in. As an aside, I think active reload can probably be done well, especially if based on rhythm, but it's generally never been a very interesting mechanic for me. So I really like this element of Control's combat. Abilities roll out at a pretty nice pace throughout the adventure, giving you fresh new things to experiment with over time, alongside the different gun forms that take on familiar archetypes. Like the guns, none of the abilities are that unusual, but again, I found them well implemented, effective, and simply fun to use. By the end of the game, you're basically a wizard, and it's satisfying. I focus primarily on the telekinetic launch skill and seize that lets you control enemies, which I augmented with a mod that decreased the time it took to take control of something. I don't think you need to be that discerning with what you invest in, though I think launch is really important as a core damage dealer that uses energy instead of ammunition. If you're exploring around a bit and doing side stuff, you'll have a pretty good amount of points to upgrade abilities. I couldn't unlock everything, but I've certainly maxed some things, and still put significant points into other skills to try, like the shield and ground slam. Even with upgrades, I haven't found close quarters moves like the melee or shield abilities as effective at dealing damage and staying safe. For a cost, there is also the option to reset abilities and try something different. By mid to late game, I'd consider the cost for this fairly low. Over its duration, the game ramps up what it throws at you pretty significantly. I don't think it's particularly challenging overall, but some enemies are certainly higher level and make you switch your tactics. I felt powerful and quick, and if you keep moving in fights, you can pick up the healing shards that enemies drop after death to keep you going. If you do get caught though, especially by the few attacks that are likely to catch you, it really hurts, and I found myself nearly getting killed in a single blow fairly frequently, regardless of my health upgrades. That constant threat of almost instant death kept me on a nice edge, but wasn't overly concerning or stressful since I could generally escape and recharge if I needed to. If I did die, it was usually from an explosion after picking up or accidentally shooting something that I didn't realize was volatile and having it explode in my face. There is this mode called Expeditions, wholly separate from the main story, that actually poses a very significant challenge. Enemies spawn in droves, while you try to complete a few different objectives, and the enemies are far tankier than those you've faced elsewhere, even if you've got powerful upgrades and mods. This is added content for those that want it, but there's limited variety given the same repeating objectives, and it felt superfluous to me. It was also frustrating given a 25-minute time limit that felt tight given how much stronger enemies were, even on the lowest tier challenge. You have to spend tokens collected elsewhere to initiate an expedition, and it comes with one or more random modifications to the game rules. These can be very detrimental and not fun, so you just have to pay to re-roll. The first one I got was a minus 50% energy regeneration, which was very uncool. If anything is causing friction with your enjoyment of the game, there's essentially a cheat menu built into the options and no reason not to use it. You can make yourself invincible or reduce damage taken, as well as decrease your ammo and ability recharge times. It's very configurable and a super neat feature. The most unexpected part of the game for me was the item and material farming. I had no idea that Control veered in this direction to provide another dimension to the combat. Your personal abilities and guns can both be augmented by mods, essentially what you'd expect from an action RPG or something similar where enemies and chests drop items of varying rarity and strength. It's nowhere near as deep as games really focused on those elements. Effectiveness across the different types of mods seemed pretty uneven. Most of the time, simply stacking damage on weapons was by far the most effective. You don't really need to engage in farming these, and I'd encourage probably not getting distracted doing so. It was nice to have some extra progression, but I still wanted to focus on the core of the game. When I ran off to do some of the repeating activities like the bureau alerts or countermeasures, it was because I wanted to get into a fight or try navigating somewhere different for a bit. Any collected things were bonus, and it just moved toward unlocking everything. The Bureau alerts are fairly repetitive. I think there are just 3 different objectives, but they can each happen in different locations. Countermeasures are simple kill challenges, using specific weapons in specific places, but getting the right types of enemies to spawn in those places often proves frustrating. You can cycle these countermeasures infinitely to try to get a specific reward you want to show up in the list. The old house is the extra-dimensional government building you find yourself exploring, and I wanted to talk about it for a moment because navigating this thing became a sort of game of its own to me. I found it strangely compelling to try to understand and traverse the physical paths that connect everything. It's dense and convoluted, and I was finding satisfaction in trying to remember how to get from any point A I choose to any point B. I didn't master this, and you certainly don't need to. There are respawn points that you can warp to throughout the game. It was just an interesting piece of the experience to me, and not one that I anticipated. There are tons of little nooks and crannies to find and explore once you've unlocked the necessary things to reach them. And the way areas loop around and connect to each other, sometimes unexpectedly, reminds me a little bit of From Software games. The old house is a great setting, providing a mix of government agency, conspiracy, and mystery. It holds essentially endless possibilities given its extra-dimensional nature, but blends with realistic, tight, intricate, almost claustrophobic corridors, office spaces, meeting rooms, machinery, and building infrastructure. It struck me as unique in these elements compared to many action games that want to make more space for action and the camera. The game's story is largely told through artifacts like written reports and video and audio recordings you collect throughout your investigation into the history of the Bureau and what has led to current events. There are so many of these, I wondered early on if it was going to become cumbersome, but I didn't find that to be the case. Some details are more meaningful than others, but as good as the action was, figuring out what was going on and looking for connections to Alan Wake was still core to the game for me. There are of course present concerns, such as navigating the Hiss invasion and the search for Jesse's brother Dylan, who has been imprisoned within the Bureau. The scenes with Dylan once you finally find him are one part that felt pretty flat for me. They dragged on and lacked substance after you'd achieved what had been your goal for a large part of the game. The character's design and personality were lackluster, and he didn't end up playing that substantial role in the story. The Threshold Kids videos were another element that I did not really enjoy. These were semi-hidden and separate from the main story, maybe to fill in some lore or provide comic relief, but they really weren't my style. Connections to Alan Wake only appeared fairly deep into the game, and only as smaller hints at first. They created a nice payoff when they did pop up. It certainly wasn't a substantial part of the game, so far, but explained how both games and their characters exist in the same world. It sounds like the second expansion will also elaborate on this connection, with the first mission referencing the Dark Place, and taking you to a new area of the old house seemingly focused on investigation of the Bright Falls altered world events. Alongside the main missions, there are a number of optional missions. I mention these here because a few of them are pretty meaty, and add some important details surrounding things you uncover while playing. I definitely have missed details if I hadn't done the substory that investigates the origin of the mold, and tracked down all the escaped altered items, including a particular mirror. Others are more rudimentary, but overall I'd highly encourage checking these out, and there aren't many of them. Some things are still left unexplained, of course, and I wonder if those elements might show up in the expansions. Playing Control has been awesome. The game seemed longer than Alan Wake, although if you just focus on the main missions, I'm not sure it actually is. I've lost track, but I think I've spent at least 20 hours roaming the corridors of the old house, trying to find all the notes and recordings, doing all the side quests. I was certainly a lot more engaged with the gameplay compared to Alan Wake, as well as the story. And I'm not done with the expansions to come back to. I hadn't heard previously that Remedy has announced 2 future Control-related projects, though they've obviously been focused on Alan Wake 2 lately. The first is Project Condor, which sounds like a co-op multiplayer extension of Control's gameplay, mod system, and dynamic environment that has some obvious potential, but I'm also not sure it's something I really need. The other project is straight up Control 2, and while I'll be very interested to hear more about both, Control 2 is absolutely on my highly anticipated list. It seems like a great time to have finally gotten around to playing Control, given Alan Wake 2's recent release. It's wonderful to have another part of this adventure to jump right into soon. Control has easily become my favorite Remedy game so far, and I wonder if Alan Wake 2 will have a chance of changing that. I think I resonate a little bit more with the tone and themes of Control, but it'll be great fun finding out. With that, as always, thank you so much for checking out the video and spending your time here on the channel. Say hi down in the comments, and until next time, take care.